Welcome into a special edition of Inside the Huddle right here on High School Cube News. 256 teams will vie for 8 state championships, all culminating Thanksgiving weekend at Memorial Stadium back into Champaign for the state championships. My name is Brian Chimino with Mike Clark of the Sun-Times, joined by Steve Soucie in this episode of the Kankakee Journal and IHSA bracketologist. And a lot of interesting stories right off the bat. A very high playoff point total had to be achieved for teams to get in this year.
Yeah, you're looking at a situation now where some 39s didn't make the field. We were dangerously close to having 40s not make the field. The last team in was Aurora Christian, and the only reason Aurora Christian had the opportunity to get there was because of a forfeit win that was awarded today to Urban Prep Bronzeville. So they wouldn't have gotten to 39 points without that forfeit win. So kind of a fortunate series of events for Aurora Christian today.
One of the local teams in Class 4A we can look at is Phillips, finishing at 8-1 and a 5 seed. And look at a matchup against number 12 Plano.
Yeah, Phillips, we've talked about that a lot all year long, actually, on Inside the Huddle. They're a team that made to the quarters last year. They've got some real playmakers in Dwayne Collins, Quavon Skanes, their pitch-catch combination, basically, and Jamal Brown in the defensive secondary. So, you know, this is probably not a bad spot for them to be in, and the seeds really don't matter too much, obviously, because the strength of schedule is what's key for Phillips. Their only loss was to Carmel, which was a larger school making the playoffs too. So that's something they're a team to be keeping an eye on for sure.
Let's move on to Class 5A, where there's an interesting story. Marion Central has a retiring coach. They got a 15 seed this year.
Yeah, Ed Brucker has announced that he's stepping down after this season, and he does have a 15 seed, but they're basically the second out of the 4 quads in 5A. Has a real interesting and a real familiar feel too, because there's 3 teams that always seem to be around in 5A: Joliet Catholic, Montini, Marion Central. They've all had some great battles among themselves over the years, and what we could be looking at is Joliet Catholic and Montini in a second round matchup, and then possibly the winner against Marion Central, again with a lot to play for in Coach Brucker's final season.
And sticking with Class 6A, Steve, what are some things that kind of stick out to you?
Well, the thing that everyone was looking at heading into the playoff announcement was where would teams land, whether that would be in 5 or 6A. And in reality, most of the bubble teams landed in 6A. Nazareth, the top seed in the northern bracket. Lincoln Way West was another team. They have a 2 seed down in one of the quads in the south. They're both in 6A. A lot of the teams that people were wondering about where they would land, Peoria Notre Dame is another one. They're all ending up in 6A, excluding Springfield Sacred Heart Griffin, who landed in 5.
And also in the bottom half of Class 6A, if you look ahead to the quarters, there's some interesting matchups.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. We could have Richards, returning state finalist, against 9-0 Lamont, which has really bounced back this year after a down year by their standards last year. That's certainly the one thing that sticks out for a lot of people.
So as we move on to Class 7A in that south, there's a very intriguing first round matchup.
Yeah, I don't know that I can remember 2 defending state champions playing each other in the first round in the past, and that's what we've got in the bottom half of 7A. We've got Batavia, which won 6A last year, is a number 5 seed, playing Mount Carmel, which played its way into the field on Friday night with a big win over Loyola at Gately Stadium. Mount Carmel, of course, a defending 7A state champ and a 2-time state champ, so that's something you don't see very often.
Absolutely not. There's some relative rarities all over the bracket, but that's the one that stood out to me immediately was that one right there, sitting down there, that 3-14 game. And the other thing was that southern bracket was so geographically spread out that I kind of expected them to go to quads there. They did not do that. It's a 1-16 bracket, so that allows a game like Batavia and Mount Carmel to be a logical destination when you line up those 16 teams.
And when you look up to the north side, there's a lot of interesting possible second round matchups.
Yeah, no doubt. Highland Park's kind of been a very quiet 9-0 this year. You know, they won the CSL North. It's going to be interesting to see how they do in the playoffs. They haven't had the greatest schedule coming into the playoffs, but they are 9-0, and there's not a lot of 9-0 teams out there. Cary Grove is a team that we've been talking about all year long. They're the top seed in 7A North, another 9-0 team. Another second round matchup worth looking at out of the North Suburban Lake Zurich and Libertyville. Lake Zurich, of course, 7A runner-up last year. played its way into the field on Friday night as well with a win, and they're a team that seems to be getting better. They lost an awful lot from last season, but got a great playoff tradition obviously there, and not a team to overlook in November. And another very interesting second round matchup in the South. We have a Catholic League Blue matchup possibly between Providence and St. Rita. Those are two of the teams that were in the mix for, two of the four teams that were in the mix for the Catholic Blue title going into Week 8. As it turned out, Providence wound up tying Brother Rice for the title. St. Rita went into the postseason with a couple of losses, but always dangerous with some playmakers like Ty Reedley and Brandon Gaston.
And we finally look up at Class 8A. There are conference rematches everywhere in the first round.
Yeah, we have a CSL South rematch. Glenbrook South at a 13 seed against number 4 seed New Trier. We have another CSL South rematch in the north half with number 14 Niles West and number 3 Maine South, which is a 3 seed despite being 9-0 and despite being a top 5 team in the state. On the bottom bracket, we've got a rematch, Upstate 8 River, Mattia Valley, and Wabansie Valley. Another game that's an interesting matchup to look at on the bottom bracket too is Brother Rice, which we've mentioned is won its first conference title in 10 years, sitting at a 5 seed in a quad with number 4 Naperville Central, which is the defending state champ, fell into a number 4 seed after losing to Wheaton South in Week 9. What are some of the things that kind of stick out to you in 8A?
Well, the thing that we talked about a lot heading into this was how they were going to shape this bracket. All 3 of the undefeated teams are on the north side of the bracket, so a lot of people had speculated that maybe they'd slide Glenbard West down into the south to maybe bracket balance a little bit, considering that Glenbard West is so close to where that line was drawn. But that ended up not happening. So you've got what on paper looks like a heavier side of the north bracket, but I think there's some dangerous threats down there in the bottom as well.
Yeah, the other thing to look at too is that there's going to be a public league team in the second round in 8A for the first time in a while. Taft and Curie. Taft a 12 seed at 7-2. Curie having a great season. Only loss was to Simeon, a 5 seed at 8-1. They're matched against each other, so one of those 2 public league teams is going to be in the second round, which is something we haven't had in 8A for a while.
Before we get out of here, I got to ask Steve a question. Steve, you tweeted earlier that the results of Week 9 last year really threw a wrench into things, but even more so this year. Were there any results from Week 9 that really kind of screwed things up?
Well, I could keep us on this video for a while with those. It was a crazy Week 9. I've been doing this for about 20 years now, and I can't recall a Week 9 that had as many 4-4 teams that were fighting for their playoff lives punch their way into the field. Wheaton, Warrensville South, and Mount Carmel most notably, but there were a lot of other ones from all over every single class, from down all the way to 1A, where there were teams that just that fought their way again against odds that were not very good. They were playing teams with much better records, and they found a way to get themselves into the field. So there were a lot of changes between Friday night and what we're seeing right now.
So playoffs kick off next Friday night all throughout the Chicagoland area. Check IHSA.org for times and locations. That'll do it for this special edition of Inside the Huddle here on High School Cube News. Beth Long will be back next week as we preview some of the top matchups in Round 1. From Mike Clark and Steve Soucie, I'm Brian Chimino, and we'll see you next week.